Hi, everyone. My name is Neil Long, and I am the Director of Education and Community Engagement for Lyric Opera of Kansas City. Welcome to Community Conversations. Why does opera matter today in Kansas City? This is the question that we are going to explore today. We are so happy to partner with Temple Buddhist Center on this event. In dialogue with The Revolution of Steve Jobs by Mason Bates and Mark Campbell, which opens this coming weekend and marks our first fully staged production in the Kaufman Center in just about 2 years. If you would like to come see the opera by attending today's event, you are invited to do so with a discount. You'll find information in your program. Also in your program is information about Temple Buddhist Center. At the rear of this space, you'll find some lozenges as well as some assisted listening devices, if you'd like to use those. So, without further ado, I'd like to introduce our panelists for today's event. Nicoya Helm offers mindfulness and mental health education to help people look deeper, dream bigger, and live better. She is a mental health first aid instructor and associate teacher at Temple Buddhist Center of Kansas City. She is also a certified level 2 coach in Shenzhen Young's unified mindfulness system and has served as a unified mindfulness coach trainer. She holds a Master's of Science in Education and Curriculum and Instruction from the University of Kansas. She enjoys music, speculative fiction, biking and hiking, and talking to strangers. Please welcome Nicoya. Mark Campbell Center. His work as a librettist is at the forefront of the contemporary opera scene in this country. A prolific writer, Mark has created 39 opera librettos, lyrics for 7 musicals, and the text for 6 song cycles and 3 oratorios. His works for the stage have been performed at more than 90 musical venues around the world, and the names of his collaborators comprise a roster of the most eminent composers in classical music and include 3 Pulitzer Prize winners. Mark Campbell, of course, is the librettist for The Revolution of Steve Jobs. Welcome, Mark.
Thank you.
And lastly, Victor Dougherty, a co-founder of the Pathless Land Center for Meditation and Mindfulness. Victor has been practicing for over 25 years and has led numerous retreats, workshops, and classes exploring Western Buddhism. Currently the director of the Temple Buddhist Center, Victor also serves on the board of Mid-America Dharma, the Greater Kansas City Interfaith Council, and several other organizations. Welcome, Victor. And without further ado, I will now turn it over to Victor to get our program started.
Thank you so much, Neil. And maybe a little for Neil, who's been working behind the scenes here to put this event together. Thank you all so much for coming today. This is really a truly depthful and meaningful event for everyone here at Temple Buddhist Center, Nicoya, myself, and we even had a chance to talk with Duke, the senior minister here at Unity Temple, who leads a meditation 2 or 3 times a week here at noon. And just the other day, he was talking with a gentleman who stayed after the meditation. Turns out to be Mr. Moore, the lead singer in the opera, playing Steve Jobs, was coming here and meditating. So it was a real treat to have just this wonderful blending and mixing of our communities. And so for my part here in the beginning of our day today, I wanted to give just a brief overview of Buddhism for many of the folks who may be joining us online and here as they get exposed to this concept within the musical itself. So I wanted to share a few things with you guys regarding Buddhism. So after teaching for nearly 45 years, Siddhartha Gautama, the traditional historical Buddha, passed away around 480 BC, and his followers began to organize a religious movement. Buddhist teachings became the foundation for what would develop into Buddhism as we all understand it today. In the 3rd century BC, Ashoka, the great Indian emperor, made Buddhism the state religion of India. Buddhist monasteries were built and missionary work was encouraged. Over the next few centuries, Buddhism began to spread beyond India. Because there were no books, it was an oral tradition. And philosophies of Buddhism became quite diverse, with monks and nuns memorizing certain parts of the teachings or interpreting ideas differently than others. They would become isolated in different parts of the country, and so therefore the teachings would take on a certain flavor, so to speak, within that tradition. However, the 4 noble truths of the Buddhist practice remain the foundation in all traditions of Buddhism. And because from the very beginning, there has been an ethos of pragmatism, adopting methods to the particular needs and circumstances of each individual. It was able to flourish and thrive even today and all over the world. Today, there are many types of Buddhism that exist all around the world. The 3 main types represent specific geographical areas. Theravadan Buddhism is prevalent in Thailand, Sri Lanka, Cambodia, Laos, and Burma, or what is now today Myanmar. Mahayana Buddhism is prevalent in China, Japan, Taiwan, Korea, Singapore, and Vietnam. Tibetan Buddhism is primarily prevalent in Tibet, Nepal, Mongolia, Bhutan, and parts of Russia and northern India. Each of these types reveres certain texts and has a slightly different interpretation of the Buddhist teachings. There are also several sub-sects of Buddhism, including Zen Buddhism and Nirvana Buddhism. Some forms of Buddhism incorporate ideas of other philosophies, such as Taoism or Bon. These teachings spread to China some 600 years later, and Zen, called Chan in China, developed in Mahayana Buddhist monasteries in the 7th century. Inspired in part by the Chinese practice of the Tao, Chan was characterized by spontaneity and a naturalness. Japan periodically sent Buddhist monks to study different schools of Buddhism in China, and in the 12th century, 2 monks separately brought Zen Buddhism west to Japan. Dogen returned to Japan to transmit the lineage of Soto Zen Buddhism, introduced in North America after the Second World War. It has flourished, and Soto Zen centers and sitting groups are active in most major cities. So what is Soto Zen? Soto Zen was developed in the 9th century by the Chinese monks Tozan and Sozan, and the first syllables of their names making up the subsequent name of the school itself. It stressed doing meditation without a goal, as everyone is already inherently enlightened. Seated, silent meditation known as shikantaza is a Japanese translation of a Chinese term for zazen. This is an expression of this silent illumination as it is interpreted. Soto Zen Buddhism is distinguished by its focus on the down-to-earth practice of everyday Zen. It encourages awareness of the workings of one's own mind as a means of living mindfully in all areas of daily life, at home, at work, and in the community. Soto Zen is for those who want to practice in everything that they do, in coming face to face with their life in all of its aspects. They come to know themselves and find their relationship to all other things. They learn to be truly here and to serve depthfully and meaningfully in all ways. And this brings us to Steve Jobs' teacher, Kobun Chino Otagawa, a Soto Zen priest. He arrived in San Francisco in 1967, carrying with him only a large bronze bell and a set of gifts to honor the establishment of the first Zen monastery in America. Like many others on his path, he had come by his sense of the meaning of impermanence, compassion, and depth of Zen through experience. All the way through the early 90s, Kobun helped to establish countless groups, monasteries, and universities throughout the United States and Europe to further the teachings of Zen Buddhism. And he was characterized by one of his closest students in this way. His style was informal. He preferred to be called Kobun, not sensei, and never Roshi. And he encouraged his students to think of him as friend, not master. His unpredictable and subtle style resonated with the times as he emphasized life in the world, encouraged his students to marry, have children, and to live the Dharma like gorillas, devotedly but secretly. And so I wanted to share this information with everyone to help kind of give you a foundation, perhaps a basis of understanding for many of the beautiful teachings and writings that Mark has chosen to share through the libretto and through this medium of opera with all of us, and how important this was in Steve Jobs' life. So I want to stop there and go ahead and turn this over now to Nicoya to share some more experiential aspects of this practice.
So, and honoring that tradition of experiential learning that all the schools of Zen celebrate, including Soto Zen, we wanted to offer a mindful musical adventure, both to lead into the conversation, but then also once we've had more of the conversation, then we'll have another mindful musical adventure to sort of take us out. And so we're going to listen to an excerpt. It's very short, and it is an instrumental piece that is very aptly titled Meditative Interlude. And it occurs in the opera right before we meet Kobun for the first time. So very appropriate, right? It's kind of setting the tone. And so I want to just pause a little audience participation here. And you don't have to raise your hand like super high. You can just waggle a finger or something if you don't want to say. I'm curious if anyone in here has ever meditated before. Oh, okay. Well, we've got some proud meditators in the audience. I'm curious if anyone would be willing to describe very simply, just in a sentence or two, what you do with your attention when you meditate or when you meditated. Can you remember like what you were doing with your brain? What were the instructions? Any volunteers? Yes.
It's not a very strict, focus.
Yeah. So using the example that was given there was using a mantra or a phrase repeated as sort of an anchor, not holding on too tight, but sort of being able to come back to that and over. Anyone else want to have something, maybe a different example that they'd like to give? Yes, in the back there.
I typically just try to follow my breath.
Okay, yeah, focusing, just following the sensations of the breath. Yeah. And so those are both examples of what we often think of as meditation. And you'll notice that this is a very tried and true thing, and it is repeatedly or continuously focusing attention on an object. And usually, as you'll notice, by the example of a mantra, a simple word or phrase, or the breath, something that's simple and continuously present. And many of you may be familiar with the image. It's an image that's very strongly associated with Japanese Zen, and it's called the Enso, and it's the brushstroke calligraphy circle, right? And so if you think of those two words, simple and continuous, those are two words that can really be symbolized in that Enso symbol. It can be interpreted in a lot of ways, but that's one. And so there is a direct connection to this type of meditative practice. But I want to frame this in a larger context, which is we might think of meditative practices as exercise that develop mindfulness, just like we might go to the gym to build our fitness, right? Mindfulness, fitness. And of course, there's a spectrum. And at one end of the spectrum, we have what we might call these practices that cultivate attention. And this is a sort of zoomed in, detail-oriented, it tends to be more linear, concrete type of practice in cultivating that aspect of our mental capability. But there's a whole other end of the spectrum. And that's an end that Soto Zen is really known for cultivating in that technique that Victor referred to, the shikantaza. We're going to start here with this excerpt, this meditative interlude excerpt from the opera at this attentional end. And then we're going to move in the second excerpt after the conversation out to this awareness end. And we'll talk a little bit more about that one when we get there. So I want to present this excerpt as a mindfulness game. And this game has kind of two parts. And the first part is to imagine that your attention is like a string. And it's a string that is going to connect you to the sounds of this interlude. Okay? And if you've ever flown a kite or tried to pull a boat into a dock using the ropes, you know that there's sort of a magic, or for the musicians who have ever played a string instrument, there's this sort of magic, right, where you don't want to hold on too tight because then the string might snap. But if you don't hold on tight enough, the object will just float away, right? So the idea here is that when you listen to this excerpt, which is quite short, it's only about 1.5 minutes long, the game is to see, can you keep that connection just to the sounds of the excerpt for the entire 1.5 minutes? And notice I said the sounds of the music, not the sounds of your internal dialogue commenting on the music, not the sounds in the room that you may find yourself in, not the images that may be created, not the beautiful stained glass or this lovely slide behind us, not the itchy left elbow, only simply the sounds of the excerpt. So that's part one of the game. Part two is imagine as your motivation that if you can do that successfully, without losing contact, continuous connection to the sounds with your attention for the entire 1.5 minutes, you'll win $1 million. So, no complicated instructions here. And also, I just want to say, this is an optional game. It's challenged by choice. You can also just sit back and enjoy the music as you wish. But if you choose to, take a moment now to just set up, do whatever you think would prepare you to win that $1 million by listening to and enjoying this meditative interlude. do I owe an imaginary $1 million to anyone? Because I know I did not win it. I am curious if anyone, just in a few words, would like to share what it was like to listen to that excerpt in that way, if you chose to do so.
I couldn't stop the dialogue. From the very start, I was saying, I'm not going to win this. It would jump in every 5 seconds, that or some other comment that would get in the way of the music, really.
Yeah.
It's really fascinating, isn't it?
Yeah, don't think about elephants, right? Yeah. So yeah, that's that challenge of like, it's like the camera just keeps getting shoved back to look at the commentary instead of the music. Yeah, interesting observation. And so that's why it's a skill, right, to learn how to keep moving the attention back. And this is definitely a style that Steve Jobs would have encountered in training. I mean, this is also part of Zen training, so I wanted to offer that. Anyone else want to share just briefly an experience? Yeah.
Well, I was expecting some real mellow, meditation music, and this is kind of perky, and it threw me off.
So yeah, entitled Meditative Interlude, we expected that kind of like soft, flowing ambient. And this had some energy, some vibrancy to it, and that was unexpected. And you noticed that. Thanks for sharing. All right, so keep this experience in mind, tuck it in your back pocket, or you may wish to continue to bring that sort of intent connection of attention to the conversation, which we're now going to embark on. I'm going to turn it over to Victor Dougherty and Mark Campbell to tell us about how this opera came together.
Thank you.
Thank you, Nicoya, so much. And Mark, again, welcome. It's just been a delight meeting with you and talking with you. And so we wanted to discuss, have a few questions here to kind of help bring out some of the process and the workings of not only on your part as an artist, as a writer, as an author, but also from the opera itself. And so I'd like to begin with this question, and feel free to adjust the mic if you need to better fit.
Okay.
With you. So Mark, when you found out that Steve Jobs had studied with a Buddhist spiritual mentor named Kobun Chino Otagawa, you made Kobun a central character in the opera. Could you please talk a little bit about that and perhaps some of the research that went into incorporating these themes of Buddhism into the opera? Of course, there's so many things one could talk about with Steve Jobs,
Sure.
And you chose this, and I'd like for you to share a little bit about that.
Sure. If we can go back a little ways to the way this opera happened was that Mason Bates, the composer, contacted me and said he wanted to write an opera. And I was familiar with Mason's music. I loved it because Mason is also a DJ, and I think we could use more DJs in opera. So I said, yes, I'd love to do that. And then he said, well, the subject of the opera is Steve Jobs. And I went, oh, damn, that's a little challenging. But I accepted it, and my job as a librettist is to find the heart of the story, to find a reason for characters to sing in an opera. And so I did my research. I started with the Walter Isaacson book, which everyone starts with. And it was great. It gave me a very strong foundation of knowledge about this man and all the complicated things in his life. But it was actually the moment that I read that Steve Jobs practiced Soto Zen Buddhism his entire adult life, I think starting around 17 or 18, with Kobun Chino Otagawa, that really gave me an in into this story. And I can confess, because research involves, like, you read so much stuff, and now you can read more stuff than you ever need to read because you don't have to spend hours in a library returning books. You just sit at home, and it leads into one thing, into another, into another, and until you go, wow, it's time for bed or a drink. And so this led me into looking at Buddhism and looking at Steve Jobs through that lens. And I will say, when I discovered the Enzo, which everyone else in this room knew about except me, I went, wow, there's something to the idea of a story being circular. Instead of a narrative going straight forward, what if the story were circular? And also the Enzo just seemed to symbolize Steve Jobs so perfectly. This was a man who, the idea of the Enzo, of course, is that you can never draw a perfect circle. And monks draw one every day. And it's to celebrate, really, the beauty and the beauty of imperfection in human beings. And if there was a man who did everything he could to hide imperfection, it was Steve Jobs. So it was easy to make Kobun Chino Aragawa a character. The more I read about him, the more I loved him. And I needed someone lovable when I have Steve Jobs on stage. And it's also, it was, of course, when I went to Mason, I said, I would like to make Kobun Chino Aragawa a character in this. Of course, his mind went to, of course, then I can have all these beautiful Asian instruments in the orchestra, which really fills out the sound. And it also goes along with the electronic component of his music, I think, quite beautifully. So that's how that happened.
Wow, thank you. You know,
Sure.
what's interesting is many folks may not realize that calligraphy masters, calligraphy is a path of awakening all by itself, much like, for example, Tai Chi, these other forms, the dance, the kabuki theater, all these different forms. And I had an opportunity to meet with a calligraphy master in Japan when I spent a little bit of time there. And one of the things he told me is that he can tell the mind state of the student by the way that they draw the letters or create the Enso. And so it's a depth of practice that the teacher is able to understand about the student.
And you're also aware, probably at this point, that Steve Jobs, when he was at Reed College, he actually dropped out, but he hung out because it was the 70s. He just wandered into a calligraphy class at Reed College and ended up taking the whole class, whether he didn't even sign up for it. The teacher just said, and he was always barefoot. He always walked around barefoot, and the teacher just said, well, whoever this barefoot guy is in this class, he should stay because he clearly loves calligraphy. And it very much influenced his work. You will remember back in the day that the original computers had like really dotted, you know, what is that called?
Like pixelated.
Yeah, pixelated type and everything. And it was hard to read. And one thing that Steve Jobs did, one of his early innovations, was to say, let's make this look better so it's friendlier. Yeah. Let's make a computer more connect more with human beings. And that was his great innovation.
Yeah, it's that aesthetic, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's that beautiful simplicity. I remember that right before the iPhone came out, we had what was like the BlackBerry and the Palm Pilots and they were massively complex. Just in other words, the idea was the more buttons, they thought the more buttons, the more we could sell, you know. And here comes the iPhone, one button. Just a little button on the bottom. And that aesthetic translated, you can see that from the calligraphy, from the Enso to his products. Even now, you know, even the stores, right? The Apple stores have completely changed marketing. And it's that aesthetic, that simplicity that he really embodied and brought out. And this whole process, you know, you have really captured in bringing this into the opera itself. So honestly, Mark, has it impacted you? Has it, you know, kind of touched your life in some way? The writings of Kobun, this aesthetic of simplicity.
Sure. I mean, the idea of simplicity is, most people I know would say, boy, I wish you learned more from the words that you've written. Because I'm a New Yorker, and simplicity is not something that's easy to attain, and also silence is impossible to attain in New York. but yes, certainly it influenced me. Sure, and I was one of those people. I mean, like I had a toaster in my East Village apartment in like 1984. I was one of the first people among my friends to be able to get one of them because I was fascinated by it. And it was the sort of thing where it had one slot where you had to keep putting a disc in because it didn't have any memory. Yes. So, yeah, I go way back with math.
The little floppy disks.
Yeah,
right?
yeah,
Oh,
yeah.
my goodness.
I remember using a program called Mac Write, and you would type a sentence, and it would say, okay, I need the disc back in. I mean, can you imagine? I mean,
Wow.
This is a long time ago.
So, Mark, you know what's amazing is this whole process of the Buddhist practice and bringing this in. Obviously, Buddhism, being almost 3,000 years old now, is sort of a classical approach to modern living today. And in the same way, could you talk a little bit about why opera matters, this classical medium that is reinvigorating and touching modern lives?
Well, that's a big question. I mean, we need several hours to
You
really
guys-
answer that. I can give you a few good sound bites, I think, but I'll start by personalizing it. I'm very lucky. I get to create opera. I love what I'm doing. I just finished my 40th opera libretto, and I'm still trying to get it right. I love the art form. I think there is no better art form for connecting an audience with what goes on stage through music. Music is the great. We all love music. Music takes us all someplace, someplace different. And opera, when you add singing, really resonates even more, I believe. So one thing that I love working with Lyric Opera of Kansas City is that this is a company that is bringing in new stories. They're not just doing Traviata or the old or Carmen or Tosca. Those are great operas, but we need new operas to connect with our audiences and connect with the issues that we're facing today, because we're facing lots of issues. And it's really important now for opera to continue to do those beautiful operas, but also to bring in new operas that tell our stories and reach our audiences.
Thank you. Yeah, you know, I've often thought of, just personally myself, as opera being a culmination of all the arts. I mean, they all come together in opera.
It is. I mean, it's music, text. Should have put text first, shouldn't I? Text, music,
Yes.
dance, orchestra,
The art
everything.
of the set, the
yeah, the
scenery,
set. There's visual art.
Costuming,
Yeah.
yes. So, could you talk a little bit about, and this was something that this question was on everybody's mind when we first started talking with Neil and the Lyric, this idea of revolution versus evolution of Steve Jobs. I don't know if folks have seen the title, but the R is in parentheses to kind of, give that impression of revolution, evolution.
Yeah, I mean, the revolution of Steve Jobs actually refers to the circular journey he takes in the opera back to his childhood. We should mention that it is actually a moment when where Steve Jobs acknowledges his own mortality, is forced to acknowledge his own mortality because he has received news about his cancer diagnosis. And it's staying with him, and he decides that he needs to go on a journey backwards in time. And in fact, he uses his own quote where he says, "You can't connect the dots going forward, you must connect them going backwards." He summons Kobun Chino Aragawa to help him with this journey. Now, Kobun Chino Aragawa has been dead for 7 years. He died earlier. His daughter had drowned, and he tried to save his daughter, and they both drowned. But he comes back and makes an appearance in this opera because I say he can. But because Steve needs Kobun to help him with this journey. And Kobun provides commentary, sometimes sarcastic, sometimes encouraging, always encouraging, because he was a teacher. And Yeah, it was. Where were we going with this? I'm sorry.
Oh, just this idea of revolution versus evolution. You
Yes, so
talk
the
about
revolution.
coming full circle.
But of course, as Steve goes on this revolution, he realizes that he has also evolved. And so it's a cute thing. And also when I learned in Microsoft Word, when you type the parentheses R and parentheses after, it turns into a registration symbol. So it annoys every single person who has to write about it. And that makes me really happy.
That's cute. Thank you. So I want to, Neil, please help me. I've lost track of time, so just let me know when I don't want to make sure we have time for some of the other things. But I'm just really enjoying talking with Mark about this. Could you talk a little bit, Mark, just on more of a personal level about just maybe your process as a writer with so many wonderful works under your belt? What inspires you? What really drives this beautiful sharing that you've been doing with the world through the medium of opera itself?
You know, it's the music. I don't write for the words. I write for the music. Every single thing that I've written has always been meant to be sung and will always be meant to be sung, because you can tell how badly I speak. Thank God I have music to back me up. No, I love opera because of the music. I wish, my favorite moments in my own operas are the ones in which the audience has stopped focusing on the words. They're with the story, they're with the emotion, but the music takes over, and it is a transporting experience. That's why I love it.
That's beautiful. Thank you so much, Mark. And I want to take a few moments here to see if anyone here would have any questions that you might want to ask of us, either about the opera itself or Mark and his process, or even Buddhism. And so let's take a moment, and I think Neil has a microphone, because we do have folks joining us online, and they would not be able to hear your question if or perhaps Neil could repeat it one way or another. So please take a moment, and we have this fabulous opportunity to be here with Mark and to talk a little bit about this. So any questions that you might have? Yes, we have one there in the back.
So the question is, what portion of Steve Jobs' life does the opera cover?
It covers a lot of it. Not. It actually mostly takes place in 2007. I did not get the Pixar years in there, so I kind of jump ahead. But it is a moment. It's a moment where Steve Jobs is in crisis. The way you always have to introduce a character in crisis, or there wouldn't be a reason for a story, and then resolves the crisis by the end. He meets Lorene Powell Jobs, which really helps him ground himself in his life. He learns to be, this will sound so ironic, but he learns to be a human being, not one of the great machines he created.
She's a real grounding presence throughout the opera. In this, you've written her in just beautifully.
Well, she saved his life, and he would say the same thing.
He said his wife? Who was that?
His wife, Lorene Powell Jobs. There's a question.
Yes.
I guess, you think of Zen, or at least when I think of Zen, there's always these images of someone, being very calm and contemplative, and always, seeking equanimity, and, maybe even up in a cave somewhere, and not a sort of interesting, sometimes volatile character like Steve Jobs and the world he operated in, out of necessity sometimes. Did you sort of form an opinion about how he balanced that in his daily life? He had to be in some very intense situations. And how did he bring himself back to, as you said, follow the practice his entire life?
So when you think of Zen, you think of somebody being really calm and cool and collected, and perhaps even up in the mountains. And then you have this juxtaposition with Steve Jobs, who is very volatile, and just the opposite. Did you play with this juxtaposition in the opera? How does it translate on stage?
The answer is yes. I mean, that's drama. So if I just presented a calm, cool person on stage, we would all fall asleep. I did my best to present Steve Jobs as a human being. And I mean, in his own words, well, actually in Lorraine's own words, humans are messy. We're complicated. You can't just open up our cases and close them. We don't have one button that turns us on or turns us off. We're chaos inside. And when we acknowledge that, and when we use something like Buddhism to help us work through that, then we can learn to accept that and move on from it and become more mindful.
Mm-hmm. We have a saying in the Buddhist practice that true peace is not an absence of noise or problems. True peace is found in the midst of those things. And so that's, kind of fits right along with what Mark was saying.
Did he meditate regularly, daily, or do you know any of those?
I don't have that information. I could lie and say he did. Yes, I spoke to him. I don't have that information, but I'm sure that he meditated enough. That's probably a horrible thing to say, but he did go on long walks. That is documented, and I keep forgetting the name of it. But he also took the circular walk. What is that called?
Kinhin.
What is it again?
Kinhin.
Yes,
It's a meditative.
he did the meditative walk, but he also would just go for walks barefoot into the hills of Cupertino, and so it obviously, if he did not always sit down and meditate, he took it with him wherever he went. Mm-hmm. And we don't think of this man as having that, but I really don't think, and we can curse the iPhone and we can curse everything that, and I do all the time, on the effect it has had on our lives. But that has to do with us and what our addictions are as human beings, not the invention that he created or that he helped create. Yeah, sure.
Yes.
At what point do you feel like you found his humanity? You mentioned starting with the biography, which would be, just about his life. But at what point did you find the humanity of Steve Jobs?
At what point did you find or discover the humanity of Steve Jobs? You started with his biography, but where did that speak to you?
It's a little bit tricky because there were several places. When I discovered, and forgive me, but when I discovered that he did acid, and that it was a seminal moment in his life. Well, I had done acid. I used to sell it in college, and I connected with him on that. I can admit that, I hope, to this. This is an adult audience, I think. So I connected on those levels, but I would say it really was the discovery of Kobun and meditation that led me into this story in a more adult way. Mm-hmm. There were other connections that I felt. And also, like I said, having that Mac in 1984 on my kitchen table in the East Village. And one other thing, I used to be a designer, a graphic designer. And so I worked in it for like 30 or 35 years, and I always worked on a Mac. And I understood the importance of typography and the importance of clean design. So those were all the things that I connected with.
I have a question for you. One of your colleagues, Kelly Rourke, is connected to Buddhism and connected to a student of Kobun, is that right?
Yeah, Kelly's a good friend of mine, and she's a wonderful librettist and a great drinking buddy too. But I finished this draft of this libretto, and she's Buddhist, and I sent it to her because she's Buddhist but also a librettist. And I said, would you mind looking at this and looking at the character of Kobun Shino Aragawa and see if I did anything wrong, if I did anything that would offend people? And she came back and said, you know what, she's not Soto Zen Buddhism. She said, I would love to help you out, but I would probably give you wrong advice. And she said, look, there's this place called the Brooklyn Zen Center. And that sounds almost like an oxymoron, doesn't it? But Brooklyn Zen. So I called them. I emailed them out of the blue, And I just said, I know this will be ridiculous, and this will sound ridiculous, but I'm writing an opera about Steve Jobs, and I wondered if you have any information about Kobun Chino Aragawa or anything that could help me out with Soto Zen Buddhism. And this woman got right back to me, and she said, help me out here, what is the head person of a Soto Zen?
Oh, like the Roshi or
A
the...
Roshi. She said, well, this woman got back to me and said, yes, I'm going to connect you with the head of this center. She has a lot of things to tell you. And so, like 10 minutes after that, this woman emailed me and said, so you came to the right place. First of all, I know what an opera is. I studied music at University of Southern California.
Oh.
And then she said, Kobun was my teacher.
Oh my goodness.
And then she ended it by saying, and also, if you must know, I went out with Steve Jobs for a couple months. So I hit the jackpot.
Yeah.
And I went out, she was wonderful, and I'm forgetting her name right now, because this is like 5-6 years ago. I went out there, she was incredible, she was so funny and wonderful, and she read the libretto and offered me criticism. I can tell you one line from the libretto is, Steve says something and Kobun says, I don't remember, you said so many foolish things. And the original line was, I don't remember, you said so many stupid things. And she said, he would never use that word. And I said, well, what about foolish? And she said, of course, we're all foolish, but none of us are stupid. And I mean, that makes such gorgeous sense to me. So she got the blessing for the libretto. And also, the first thing she says is, I can't believe how well you captured Steve Jobs. You got the coldness. And I didn't think you were going to be able to do that. So it was a tremendous experience.
Wow, that's a great story. Thank you.
Thank you for asking that question.
Mark, yes. And I think in the essence of time, we should go ahead. If you do still have questions, we invite you to maybe write them down, or you can email me or something, and we'll get it with Neil and Mark at some point.
Yeah, can I say one final thing? You guys have a tremendous opera company here. Please support it. Tell your friends to support it. It's key to cultural life in a city. And a lot of us don't think that. We think opera is this European art form that doesn't address our issues anymore. Not this opera company. So please support it and get your tickets. It's a fun, beautiful opera. But beyond that, come again and again to see opera. It needs your support. And it's an art form I believe in. So, and I think if you support it, you'll soon believe in it as well. Thank you.
Well said.
Okay.
So I believe Nicoya has a second opportunity to experience some of the workings and the underpinnings of this Buddhist practice that Steve Jobs was so important to him in his life.
Yeah. So we're gonna continue on with that Enso theme. So remember, I talked about this. There's a spectrum, but the thing about a spectrum is if you go far enough off of one direction, you usually come around to the other. So, if you think about that first activity that we did, and remember I used that word attention, and I talked about this string of attention focusing on the sound. So that's a very kind of zoomed in, detail-oriented type of way to use our brain. And there's a lot of value to that, right? That tends to be the thing that we call upon when we want to get the words on a page. We need to put things together and make them happen. And we could use that word attention. We could call that sort of like being able to see the details on an individual tree. But there's this other way that our brain works that we might call awareness. And I'm using these terms from not from a Zen teacher, but from someone from the Theravada tradition named John Yates, also more known as Chuladasa, who also has a background in neuroscience. And this awareness way of our mental processing is something that, just like the attention way, we can cultivate it, we can practice it. And it has sort of, it's the 180, right? It has the other qualities. It's sort of the big picture, seeing the forest, noticing the contours. It's less effort. It tends to trade the clarity of detail for the fuzziness of the overall feeling, you know, that word gestalt. And the interesting thing is, while the attentional aspect is what really helps us put things into the world, that awareness aspect is often what's really associated with creativity, right? It's the thing that lets us make these unexpected connections between seemingly unrelated things, right? If we were so zoomed into that individual detail, we wouldn't see all these other things floating around that might be able to, all these multiple details that might be able to connect. And that is what the Soto Zen school is known for, this practice called shikantaza. And this term it's a term of art, shall we say. If you went up to an average Japanese person on the street, they would not know this term. I checked with a friend who's Japanese, and I didn't give her any hints. I said, just I'm going to give you these characters. And she's like, wait, those are Chinese characters. I was like, I know, I just had to check. And I was like, okay, here's the term. She's like, sorry. And the fact that the term did come from Chan, from the Chinese school of Buddhism. And this term was never translated into Japanese characters, which also says, you know, it's a kind of a term of art. And what it means in Japanese, it's usually translated as just sit or just sitting. Anytime you see that's the character that is spoken as za, that's usually in, you know, zazen, seiza, zabuton, zafu. These are all terms that have to do with like sitting cushions and sitting type of meditation. That za has to do with sitting. And so that's the name of this, is just sit. It's also sometimes called the methodless method. And it is a style of meditation, but it is one in which you're not trying to meditate. And Dogen, the originator, the one who's kind of considered the founding father of the Soto Zen school in Japan, his instructions are very simple. We keep using that word, simplicity. And they're to sum it down just to the phrase that's most famously attributed to him, is think, not thinking. Okay. So what's a modern mind who maybe doesn't have access to a Soto Zen master who would give maybe slightly more instructions? There is a little joke in Buddhist circles, though, however, that goes something like, Zen teachers say too little, other meditation teachers say too much. So yeah, think, not thinking. That was the extent of it. You know, just do that. So what I'd like to present is about a 12-ish minute experience, another mindful musical adventure, and we will incorporate another excerpt. And I want to talk about the excerpt first, and then I'll talk about what we're going to do, or I should say not going to do, during this. And the excerpt is called Look Up, Look Out. Did I get that right? I tend to want to switch the out and up. And this is sung by Laureen, or started by Laureen, and it sort of brings everything full circle, and I think that you'll hear that in the piece. I don't want to spoil it for you. So when we get to that piece, the meditation is going to go right into the excerpt, and I will give a prompt. You don't need to remember this, but you'll have a choice at that point, which is just to sit back and appreciate the music in whatever way you normally would. And the lyrics are actually on the program sheet that you received at the beginning if you'd like to follow along. But you also have the choice to continue the meditation practice that I'm going to offer and see if and how that affects your experience of the music. So know that both of those options are available to you. And this invitation to this adventure is, it is an invitation. You can also just choose to sit back and do whatever you want in the privacy of your own mind as I offer this guidance. Now, I'll explain the instructions. You don't have to remember them. I'll also guide you into them. But basically, I would like to offer a modern interpretation of shikantaza, which was formulated by a teacher named Shinzen Yang. Despite the Japanese name, he is not from the Soto Zen lineage, but he has practiced extensively in Zen and was trying to think of a way to kind of offer this in an accessible formulation or set of steps for the modern sensibility. And the instructions are this: just sit. Don't try to do anything. If you happen to notice an intention to control your attention, drop it. Which means don't monitor for any intention, because that would be controlling your attention. So there's no such thing as distraction in this technique. Simple, right? Just sit. Shikantaza. Do nothing. And that sounds like a place we should all be pretty comfortable. We talk about wanting to relax, to just, oh, I wish I could just let go of all this busyness and do nothing. And it can be a very peaceful state to rest in. But it doesn't always, there's that transition from letting go of the doing that can be a little rough. And if you want to know how rough, you can just try the experiment yourself. But there were some researchers back in 2014 who published, they gathered results of about 11 different experiments. And there were variations on the same experiment for different lengths of time, sometimes 6 minutes, sometimes longer, like 14, 15 minutes. And they would invite people into a quiet room with nothing in it but a chair and say, just sit here. Just sit here. The only thing that you have the option to do besides just sit here is there is this little device. And if you want to, you can give yourself a little electric shock. Over 11 different studies, 67% of the men and 25% of the women who chose to participate gave themselves shocks. That's how preferable having something to do, even if it was relatively unpleasant, was, versus shikantaza, just sit. And I'm not priming you for a negative experience. I'm just saying there's some benefit to being able to ride that wave into the peace that's on the other side of the struggle. So with that, I will invite you, posture in, if you were to see a picture of people practicing Soto Zen, interestingly, they're often facing a blank wall, right? Because we wouldn't want any distractions. I'm not going to ask you to do that. Wherever you're sitting, posture plays a really important part because you're not doing anything else. So just to the extent that you're able to, you might, sometimes it helps to kind of invite in a nice open breath, but that's optional. But just imagine the crown of your head sort of lifting up and away from your shoulders. And then just let the shoulders, the chest, the belly, they kind of naturally want to settle into gravity when you breathe out. So you might just let that naturally happen. And eyes can be open or closed at any time during this adventure. Eyes open can sort of help with alertness. Eyes closed can sort of help if you're feeling a little more distracted. So it's your choice. And just right here at the beginning, I want to remind you of that attention experience. And so just as a starting place, I'll invite you to put attention on the breath. And there's no need to control it or change it, but if it feels good, you might invite in a nice open in-breath. And then just let that go. releasing, settling. And so for just a few seconds here, use that attentional skill and just stay with what it feels like to breathe. You might notice those sensations around your nose, around the mouth, in the rise and fall of the chest or the belly, just wherever you naturally notice it. So I'll leave you in silence to try that for just about a minute or so. Now I will invite you to make a shift, letting go of the need to control attention and moving into what we might call natural awareness. So if there's any impulse, any noticing of an attempt to direct attention in a particular way or place, see if you can just let that go. So that attention becomes like a cloud in the sky. You can observe it if you wish, but even that we're not attempting to control. And so for about the next 3 minutes or so, I'll leave you in silence to just do nothing. You may be convinced that attention must be directed, there must be some place to land. But investigate, see if this is really true. You can just let go. There's no such thing as distraction. That's just the natural movement of attention in this particular practice. And of course, you're always welcome to choose your own adventure, to go back to directing attention, but if you choose to continue to explore, do nothing, try that for just 1 more minute. Nothing to do, nothing to control, just pure awareness. In a moment, we're going to introduce the musical excerpt. And so my invitation to you now is to make a choice, a conscious choice of whether you will let go of any meditative practice and just sit back, perhaps enjoy reading the lyrics as you follow along and enjoy the music. But you may also wish to continue. So you have that choice. You can continue in this contemplative state and explore what it's like to experience the excerpt in this way. So this excerpt is about 4.5 minutes. I invite you to enjoy this. Look up, look out.
And after this is over, the very second this is over, for better or worse, everyone will reach in their pockets or purses. And guess what? Look at their phones, their one device. I'm not sure version 2.0 of Steve would want that. Version 2.0 might say, look
So feel free, if your eyes were still closed, to just open them, stretch, and shift. And we do have just a few minutes, and I'd like to see if anyone has any comments or questions about that experience, anything that you noticed about that one versus the one we did at the beginning, or just any other burning questions for this entire panel. Just take a couple of minutes here. You were all, what was the word? Something out.
Mellowed out.
Mellowed out.
Mellowed out.
Yeah, hey, no worries. You can just sit and marinate. That's fine by me. That's my job. That's what I'm here to do. Yeah, so I just want to repeat that so our live stream audience can be sure to hear that observation, was that we have all the jobs helped create this iPhone device which distracts us so greatly, and yet there's this theme of trying to return to simplicity and stillness, and there's a great irony there. And I'm wondering...
Well, in the Buddhist practice, we only know life through contrast. You only know hot because there's cold. You only know day because there's night. And so there is good, bad, right, and wrong don't actually exist. And so by knowing this contrast of all of the freneticness and all the busyness of life, we have to know that in order to know the not busy. So it may seem ironic, but it's not wrong. In other words, we continue to experience the different sides in order to know them. You know, you have to know suffering in order to know not suffering, so to speak. So yeah, you know, he's doing exactly what he's supposed to do at the exact time he's supposed to do it. It's always that way.
I appreciated the comment about feeling mellow, and I also feel very mellow. This partnership has been an opportunity for me to experience Temple Buddhist Center for the first time, and I'm curious, what does Temple Buddhist Center offer if I want to experience this mellowness again?
Oh my, thank you, Neil. So, of course, we would send everybody to our website, templebuddhistcenter.com, or to our Facebook page. And there you'll find we have quarterly day-long retreats to experience what you just did over the course of one day. We also have 4- and 5-day retreats to experience it for a longer time. And we have lots of little groups that meet on an evening basis to talk about all of these different things and the different approaches to life circumstances and situations. So there's really something there for everybody, as well as, of course, our Sunday services. We have a meditation service every Sunday from 9 o'clock to 10 o'clock, and then one from 10:30 to 11:30. And there'll be meditation and a Dharma Dharma talk or a teaching, as well as heart practices like loving kindness or metta practice. So lots of opportunities there.
And we do have midday meditations on Tuesdays, Wednesdays, and Thursdays. Tuesdays and Thursdays are streamed on Facebook, and Wednesdays is via Zoom, and they're just 30 minutes. So we have the full spectrum, right? Multiple days and multiple minutes, whatever suits your
And also, Neil, this might be the time, on behalf of Temple Buddhist Center, we wanted to present Mark with this little wall tapestry as a guest of ours here today. Beautiful. And it has the symbol of the Om on it. Many people have heard Om. And Om in Sanskrit or Pali is the seed sound, the sound of the universe, reminding each one of us that we are a beautiful note in a grand cosmic opera forever playing.
Thank you so much. It's
absolutely
beautiful.
And it comes with a little pouch because I know you're flying all over the
But I'll fly better now.
Yes.
Thank you. That's really
Thank
beautiful
you,
and
Mark,
generous.
for being
Thank you.
here.
Thank you, Mark, for being here, and of course for writing the opera. And thank you to Nicoya and to Victor for guiding this beautiful experience. I met with them 6 months ago when I was new at the Lyric and said, hey, we're doing this opera about this guy, and there's this other guy in the opera named Kobun. What can we do with that? And from a meeting at Panera came this beautiful experience. If you would like to experience more community conversations to unlock the potential of opera, stay tuned because there are more of these coming up. In fact, there's one this Thursday, March 10th from 4 to 6 p.m. And we are partnering with Startland News to explore entrepreneurship in Kansas City as an art. It will be at Spark Co-working Facility downtown in the Two Light Building, and that's this coming Thursday from 4 to 6. As I mentioned at the beginning, we invite you to please come see the opera. If you don't already have your tickets, it's not too late. You can buy them online, and there's a discount available. More information is in your program, and for those of you watching online, there will be a banner displayed, and you can also find some information in the comments. Lastly, I invite you all to watch your email tomorrow morning for a survey so we can learn more about you and your experience so that we can continue offering such experiences to our beloved Kansas City community. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Oh, thank you, Mark. It was fantastic.